Montana Territory, late spring of 1883. The wind rolled low across the plains outside Dawson's Creek, carrying the scent of rain and the weight of something changing. Farron Cole had not meant to stop at the white clapboard church on the edge of town. His horse had thrown a shoe a mile out, and by the time he walked into Dawson's Creek leading the limping gelding, the sky had turned a bruised purple. Thunder cracked in the distance. Farron tied the reins loosely to the rail and stepped beneath the church's awning, shaking dust from his coat. That was when he saw her. She sat on the bench just outside the church doors, hands folded in her lap. Her calico dress was wrinkled, hem damp where it brushed the wooden planks of the porch. She looked young, but not too young, maybe 23, 24. Her dark hair was pulled back in a braid, and her face was still, like she had been sitting there for hours. Her boots were scuffed. Her eyes were red-rimmed but dry. Farron cleared his throat. "You all right, miss?" She looked up slowly. "I will be." He nodded once, then leaned against the railing. The rain came down light at first, then steadier. Neither of them moved. "I'm Farron Cole," he said after a minute. "Was not planning on stopping here, but looks like we both ended up waiting out the same storm." She gave a small nod. "Clara Whitlow." "Nice to meet you, Clara." She offered a tired smile. "You too." They sat quiet for a while, listening to the rain drum against the roof. Farron did not ask why she was alone or why her eyes looked like she had not slept in days. He just waited. "After a long stretch," she said. "I came here with my brother. He went off to the saloon 2 nights ago. I waited. He never came back. I went looking. The sheriff says he left town on a freight wagon, took my money with him." Farron's jaw tightened. "Left you here with nothing?" Clara nodded once, eyes on the street. "I got $2 and a comb in my satchel. No family left. No place to go." Farron stared out at the rain. He had seen a lot on the trail, too many women left behind by men who promised more. But something about Clara made his chest ache. She looked like she had fought too long to give up now, but was running out of fight. "I have a place," Farron said after a beat. "Small homestead about 15 miles west. Not much, but it's mine. I've been working it alone the last few years. Could use a pair of hands, someone who knows how to cook better than I do." She turned to him slowly, eyes searching. "You offering me work?" "I am." He hesitated. "And maybe more than that." Her brow furrowed. Farron stood, brushing the rain from his hat. He took a breath, then held out his hand to her. "Clara Whitlow, I found you sitting on this church bench. You got nowhere to go, and I got too much land for one man alone. Come with me. Build a life with me. We can start over, together." Clara stared at his hand. Her throat moved as she swallowed. "You do not even know me." "I know enough," he said. "You stayed. You did not run. And I got a feeling we both need the same thing, a place to belong." Her hand trembled slightly as she reached for his. When their fingers touched, something settled in her face like the wind had shifted inside her. She stood slowly, her small satchel clutched in her other hand. "All right," she said, "but I am not marrying a man I just met." Farron gave a quiet smile. "I am not asking you to, not yet." They stepped off the church porch together as the rain slowed to a mist. Farron helped her onto his horse, then walked beside them as they made their way west. By the next morning, the sky had cleared. The homestead came into view. A small cabin with a lean-to barn, a well, 2 acres of fenced pasture, and another 10 stretching out wild behind it. Clara stood in the doorway, arms folded, staring out at the land. "This all yours?" she asked. "Every inch," Farron said. "Bought it with Army pay and 3 years of hauling freight." She walked out into the grass, her boots sinking into the soft spring earth. "It is quiet here." He stepped up beside her. "It stays that way." She looked sideways at him. "You do not talk much, do you?" "I talk when it matters." Clara nodded. "Good." That night she cooked biscuits and salted pork over the stove while Farron mended a harness. They did not speak much. But when she passed him a plate, their fingers brushed again. This time her hand lingered for a second longer. Over the next week, Clara settled into the rhythm of the place. She rose early, fed the chickens, swept the porch, helped in the garden. Farron repaired the roof, split firewood, and built her a shelf for her books, which she had carried wrapped in cloth at the bottom of her satchel. They ate every meal together. She laughed once when he burned the beans. He laughed when she tried to milk the goat and it kicked over the pail. One afternoon, Farron came in from the barn with a fresh gash across his forearm. Clara stood up fast, her face pale. "What happened?" "Fence wire snapped. Just caught me." "Sit," she ordered, already moving for the basin. She cleaned the wound carefully, her hands steady, though her breath came fast. Farron watched her work in silence. "You do not need to take care of me," he said softly. She looked up, eyes clear. "I want to." He reached up and brushed a damp strand of hair from her cheek. She did not pull away. That night, Farron brought out a small wooden box. Inside was a ring, simple silver, a little worn but clean and whole. "I bought it years ago," he said. "Never found the right hand to give it to." Clara stared at it. "I meant what I said, Clara. I want you here, not just to help. I want you to stay with me." She looked at him, really looked, then she took the ring and slid it on her finger. "I will stay," she whispered, "and I will build a life with you." Farron stood, pulled her close, and held her quiet. The fire crackled low. Outside, the wind had gone still. And in that small, quiet cabin on the edge of the prairie, something whole began. By early June, the cottonwoods along the creek had leafed out heavy, their branches casting wide, dappled shade across the yard. Clara stood at the edge of the vegetable patch, a hoe in her hand and her brow damp under the straw bonnet Farron had found for her in the barn loft. The rows were just beginning to sprout radish, turnip, beans, and she moved carefully between them, coaxing the earth into neat lines. Farron was laying fence farther down the slope, hammer echoing faint against the hills. He paused now and then, watching her from behind the post he was driving in. There was a steadiness in the way she moved, deliberate, quiet, like she'd made peace with the rhythm of a place that asked for patience more than speed. She did not see him walk up until he was beside her. "You planted them tight," he said, glancing at the rows. "They'll stretch," she answered. "So long as the ground's good." He nodded, then crouched to brush a palm over the soil. "You think it is. I think it's better than most." She wiped her hands on her apron. "You don't ask me many questions. I don't want to crowd you." Clara rested the hoe against the fence and sat down on the edge of the low wagon bench nearby, tucking her skirt beneath her knees. "Sometimes a question's not crowding. Sometimes it's just wanting to know." Farron glanced at her, thoughtful. "What would you have me ask?" She hesitated, then said, "Why did you come back here? After the freight hauling, after the army, why this place?" He leaned against the fence rail. "I came through here once when I was 19. Just passing through, driving cattle west. I stopped one morning to water the horses and saw the sun hit the grass like fire. Thought if I ever got out clean, I'd come back. Took me some years, but I did." Clara watched the wind ripple through the meadow. "You always keep your word to yourself. Try to." He shifted his weight. "My mother used to say if a man breaks his promises to himself, he won't keep them to anyone else." Clara looked at her hands. "My mother used to say something like that too. She said you can't build anything true if you lie to the quiet parts of yourself." They sat in silence for a long moment. Then Farron asked, "What were you hoping for, coming west with your brother?" Clara's voice was steady. "A start. Nothing grand. Just a place where no one knew what came before." She drew a breath. "He wasn't always like that. When Pa died, he took up drinking. Thought he was protecting me, but he was just running." Farron didn't interrupt. I kept thinking if I stayed near, I could pull him back. But some folks don't want to be saved. They just want someone nearby when they go under. Farron was quiet, letting her words settle. After a time, she looked over at him. "Why haven't you asked to kiss me?" He blinked. "Didn't think you were ready." "I think I might be." Farron stepped closer, not hurried. He reached out, his hand resting lightly along her jaw, thumb brushing the edge of her cheek. She leaned forward just enough to meet him halfway, eyes open until the last breath before their lips touched. The kiss was soft, no fire, no rush, just the quiet knowing of two people who had carried too much alone for too long. When they parted, Clara looked down and let out a soft breath. "I haven't kissed anyone in 3 years. You still remember how?" he said gently. She smiled, small and real. "So do you." That night, they sat beneath the eaves after supper, watching the stars come out one by one. Clara was mending a tear in the cuff of Farron's shirt, her fingers moving sure through the fabric. Farron sat beside her, whittling a piece of pine down to a spoon. "Do you miss the trail?" she asked. "Sometimes. The quiet of it, but not the loneliness." She nodded. "I used to think I liked being alone, then I realized I just didn't expect anything else." Farron looked over at her. "And now," Clara tied off her thread, "now I'm learning it's different when you choose it with someone, instead of being left with it." A coyote called from across the ridge. Clara folded the shirt and set it on the bench. "I've been thinking," she said. "We could trade eggs for flour with the Thompsons down the road. And I could maybe take in some mending from town. That way I'm pulling weight, not just eating your food." Farron shook his head. "You're more than pulling weight, but if it makes you feel better, we'll do whatever trades you like." She tilted her head. "You always this agreeable. Only with folks who know what they're doing." She laughed quiet but full and leaned into his shoulder. He didn't move, just let her rest there, the night folding around them like a blanket drawn close. They stayed like that until the lantern burned low, the stars thick as spilled salt above them. And for the first time in a long time, Clara did not feel like she was waiting for something to go wrong. The hayfield behind the cabin had begun to yellow at the tips, and the days grew long with the press of midsummer. Clara had taken to rising just after dawn, not with urgency, but with a quiet sense of purpose. Each morning, she poured water over her hands from the tin basin and watched the dew burn off the grass as she dried them. One morning, as she buttoned her blouse and stepped outside, she noticed the sky low with heat already, the kind that made the air hum. Farron was near the barn, setting a wooden yoke across the ox team. His shirt clung to his back and his hat was pulled low, the brim shadowing his eyes. She stopped near the fence, resting a hand on the post. "You planning to take them up the ridge?" He nodded once, checking the straps. "There's a patch of timber needs clearing. Figured I'd cut enough for winter." Clara stepped closer, brushing a bit of straw from his shoulder. "I want to ride out toward the south bend. There's wild rose growing thick there. I thought I'd gather some for the table." Farron lifted his head. "Take the gelding," the Appaloosas favoring his front leg. She hesitated. "You trust me to ride out alone?" "I trust you to know what you need." Her fingers curled lightly around the fence rail. "I'll be back before the sun dips." She rode out steady and slow, following the creek where it bent through old cottonwood groves, the gelding's hooves soft against the loam. The land opened wide around her, unbroken but for the distant blue of the foothills. When she reached the thicket of wild rose, she dismounted and let the reins fall slack, the gelding grazing nearby without fuss. The roses were pale pink. Some veined with white like frost had kissed them and not quite let go. Clara moved carefully between the brambles, filling her basket, the scent sweet and sharp in the thick air. She didn't hear the man approach until he was nearly beside her horse. "You from Dawson's Creek?" he asked, voice roughened by dust. Clara turned slow, eyes narrowing. The man was lean, sun-creased, with a rifle slung across his back and boots worn to the stitching. "No," she said evenly. "I live west." He tilted his head, studying her. "Didn't figure there was much west but grass. There's more if you know where to look." He stepped closer to the gelding, reaching for the reins. "That your man's horse?" Clara didn't move. "Yes. And he'd be glad to see it come back with me on top of it." The man gave a low chuckle but dropped the reins. "Didn't mean no trouble. Just haven't seen folks settle out here in a while." Clara met his gaze. "We're settled." He tipped his hat and turned back toward the trees without another word. She waited until he disappeared into the grove before leading the gelding away, her basket full but her jaw tight. By the time she reached the cabin again, the sun sat sharp above the hills. Farron was at the well, sleeves rolled, face streaked with dust. He straightened as she approached. "You're late," he said. "I know." She handed down the basket. "I wasn't alone out there." His face changed, not with fear but with a stillness she'd come to read as watchful. "Who?" Didn't give a name. Said he thought no one lived west. Farron set the basket on the porch. "You all right?" I told him we were settled. Her voice didn't shake. He nodded once, then unlatched the barn door and walked inside. When he came back out, his rifle was slung across his back. "I'll ride out after supper, just to see if he's still near." Clara stepped into his path. "He didn't threaten me." "I believe you," Farron said. "But a man who watches from the trees is a man worth watching back." They didn't talk more on it. That evening, Clara set out the beans and bread, and Farron ate without hurry. But when the last light frayed across the porch planks, he mounted up and rode east, his silhouette sharp against the orange sky. Clara watched from the doorway until he disappeared past the ridge. Then she lit the lantern and set it by the window. He returned near midnight. She heard the horse first, then the soft creak of the leather as he dismounted. He came in quiet, dust in his hair, his coat damp from the creek. "He's gone," he said. "Left no sign he meant to linger." Clara folded her arms. "You're sure?" "As sure as I can be." She studied him. "You didn't have to ride out." "I did." He unbuckled the rifle. "I won't let anything touch this place, not while you're in it." Something pulled in her chest, not sharp but deep. She stepped forward and took his hand, rough and warm from the reins. "I've never been protected," she said softly. He turned her palm up, pressing his thumb gently across her wrist. "It's not about protection, it's about choosing to stand beside someone." She looked up at him, the lantern's glow soft across his face. "Then that's what I want, not just safety. I want the standing beside part." He leaned down, brushing his lips to her forehead, slow and steady. "Then that's what you'll have." Outside, the wind moved through the grass, low and even. Inside, the light burned warm, and Clara rested her head against his chest, the beat beneath her ear as sure as morning. By July, the heat had settled deep into the bones of the land. Days passed in long, golden stretches, where the air shimmered over the pasture, and even the birds fell quiet in the midday stillness. Clara kept to the shade when she could, working by the open window with her sleeves rolled and her hair bundled high. The cabin stayed cool with the shutters drawn, and she stitched by the light that slanted through the cracks, the rhythm of the needle steadying her thoughts. Farron came in near dusk, shirt damp at the neck and hands blackened with creosote. He'd been treating the fence posts on the north slope, where the soil ran thin and stubborn. He touched the brim of his hat and leaned his shoulder against the doorframe, watching her with a tired fondness that didn't need words. "You smell like pine and smoke," Clara said without glancing up. "Fence won't hold without pitch," he replied. "Rains'll come hard when they do." She set aside the linen and rose from the chair, wiping her hands on her apron. "You need to soak that shirt before it ruins." He peeled it off with a wince. You always this particular. I don't like waste. She took it from him and hung it near the door. And I don't like you walking around with splinters in your back. He looked at her sidelong. You offering to check me for splinters? Clara stood still for a moment, then closed the distance between them. She ran her fingers gently along his shoulder blades, inspecting the red welts and streaks across his skin. One near your spine, she murmured. Small. I can get it. He sat on the bench without a word. She fetched the sewing needle, heated it briefly in the flame, and knelt behind him. Her hand was steady as she worked, but her voice came low. Do you ever think about what you'd be doing now if you hadn't come back to this place? Farron tilted his head slightly. Sometimes. Freight, maybe, or drifting between claims. But likely I'd be tired in a stranger's room, thinking about a piece of land I'd never owned. She pulled the splinter free and pressed a damp cloth to the spot. And now I come home to someone who doesn't flinch when I walk in. Clara folded the cloth carefully. There's a kind of peace in that. There is, he said. Doesn't rattle like the old kind. She stood and rinsed her hands in the basin. There's a woman in town keeps asking if I'll teach her girl letters. She heard I came from back east. Wants her to learn proper. You thinking about it? Clara nodded. Only a few hours a week. Wouldn't pull from the work here. She'd be lucky to learn from you. Clara turned toward him, her expression unreadable in the dim light. You really think that? I know what kind of care you take with things that matter. She stepped closer, resting her arms around his shoulders. You matter. Farron's breath caught just slightly before he pulled her into his lap, arms firm around her waist. She laid a hand against his chest, feeling the slow, sure rhythm beneath her fingers. I think about the bench sometimes, she said quietly. That church porch, how everything was still like the world was holding its breath. I remember, Farron murmured. I didn't know what I was waiting for, she said, but I think it was this. He kissed her temple, slow and sure. It was always going to be this. They stayed like that until the light faded into blue and the cicadas began their long hum. When they finally moved, it was only to carry the lantern back inside, the door closing soft behind them, the hush of evening wrapping around the cabin like a promise. The corn tassels had begun to yellow, and the shadows stretched longer each evening as August deepened. Clara stood on the back stoop, apron damp from the wash, watching a pair of meadowlarks pick through the dust near the chicken coop. The scent of sun-warmed wood and soap clung to her sleeves. From inside came the faint scrape of Farron sanding down a rocking chair he'd started building, his hands never idle, even after supper. She stepped inside, brushing her palms dry. You always this restless come dusk. Farron didn't look up from his work. Can't sit still when something's half finished. Clara leaned against the doorframe. You've been shaping that chair for days. He ran the cloth smooth across one of the armrests, then met her eyes. It's not for me, she blinked. No. I figured you'd want a place to sit with your sewing when the baby comes. The silence between them held. Clara's mouth parted, but no words came. Farron set the cloth down gently. You didn't say anything, so I waited, but I knew. She stepped closer, her voice hushed. I only found out last week, wasn't sure how to. You don't need to be sure all at once. He reached for her hand. We'll figure it through. Her fingers curled into his, slow and certain. I didn't expect it, not this soon. He brushed his thumb along her knuckles. Sometimes life rushes in before you're ready. Doesn't mean it's wrong. She looked down, tears gathering sharp and fast. I thought I might feel afraid, but I don't. Farron pulled her into his arms. There was no grandness in the moment, only the solid weight of two people choosing not to run. That night, they pulled the mattress near the window to catch the breeze. Clara curled against him, her back to his chest. Farron rested his palm over her stomach, not speaking, just breathing with her in the stillness. By late September, the air had turned clean and dry, and Farron had finished the chair. He placed it near the hearth, where the light from the front windows fell warm across the floor. Clara ran her hand over the smooth pine and sat down slowly, the curved seat shaped just for her. "I feel foolish," she said, smiling faintly, "getting sentimental over furniture." "It's not furniture," Farron said. "It's a place made for you." She reached up, pulled him down beside her, and tucked herself into his side. "You ever think about your people?" "Where they are now, sometimes," he said. "But I don't miss what they were, I miss what they could have been." Clara nodded. "I think about my mother, how she'd be surprised to see me here, not for the land or the house, but for the way I'm loved." Farron turned to her, his voice low. "You are. You always will be." The first frost came early that year, silvering the grass in the hollows before dawn. Farron stacked wood high along the wall, and Clara began stitching thicker blankets, her belly rounding beneath her skirts. She moved slower now, but with the same steady purpose that had drawn him to her that first day. One morning, as the wind began to bite sharper, Farron came in with a parcel wrapped in cloth. "What's this?" she asked, taking it from his hands. "Something from the general store. Traded for it last month." Inside was a pair of baby booties, hand-knit in soft wool, and a small wooden rattle carved in the shape of a bird. Clara pressed them to her chest. "You're already better at this than I ever will be." He shook his head. "We'll both learn." "That's the point." She reached for him, pulling him down until their foreheads met. "I didn't think I'd ever have this." "I didn't either," Farron said. "But here it is." The baby came in early February, a girl with a shock of dark hair and lungs strong enough to rattle the windows. Clara held her against her chest as the fire crackled low, sweat drying on her brow, tears slipping down her cheeks as Farron knelt beside the bed, one hand cradling theirs together. They named her Willa, after Clara's mother. Spring returned slow and golden. Willa slept in a cradle Farron built, her tiny fists curled like seeds ready to take root. Clara rocked her gently in the pine chair, the window open, the scent of thawing earth curling through the room. One warm afternoon, Clara stepped out with Willa swaddled close, watching Farron mend the gate at the edge of the yard. He looked up and grinned, not wide, just enough to crease the corners of his eyes. Clara walked to him, kissed his cheek, and stood beside him in the sun. "Fence holding?" she asked, "strong as it needs to be." They stayed there a long time, shoulder to shoulder, watching the land breathe back to life. Behind them, the cabin stood solid and quiet, smoke curling up from the chimney, chickens pecking through the grass, and the cradle just inside the door. They had no need for grand words or vows. Everything that mattered had already been built slow, honest, and together, and it would hold. Through hard winters and long summers, through silence and laughter, through the weight of days and the hush of nights, they had found the place they belonged, and in each other they stayed.